Thank you very much. I'm just going to put in my card so you can visit this presentation later. Feel free to use it in your classes or for whatever purpose you might deem. I'm not sure if I have quite enough, but I might be able to dig out some more if anyone's interested. So to give you a bit of background on this, originally I was doing a TA shift for a class called Light-Based Media at Concordia, Montreal, and I was asked to compile a talk for the students who are mostly undergraduate pre-service teachers on the subject of truth in photography. So that was several years ago, and I've done this presentation a few times, and it keeps evolving, and I keep adding to it. And the more research I do, the more interesting, the more complex, and the deeper it becomes. Dim the lights a little bit.
Can you speak a little louder?
Okay, sorry. There's no microphone.
Yeah, okay. Can everyone? It's too much for you there. There we go.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, great. So this is kind of an interactive discussion. So I'd like everyone to participate as much as possible. And maybe you can also take something away from each other's comments and responses in addition to the material that I'm presenting here. So I'm going to start with a partial quote from Louis Hines, or I have to check that S off. And this is a partial quote. While photographs may not lie, liars may not photograph. And I find and the pretext of this quote is talking about the objective beauty beforehand, but this is the end quote. And that was in 1909, well over 100 years ago. But I find these words are every bit as poignant today as they were when he first spoke them. So, for those of you who might not be familiar with this is a Canadian brand. It's Canadian Tire, which is kind of a household brand in Canada. It's very much a combination, I guess, of like Lowe's and Dick's Sporting Goods kind of jammed together. But I came across this in a pile of flyers one night, and this was after an evening of correcting student works. So maybe it was because I was in the mindset of just analyzing, critiquing photographs. I'm not quite sure, but it just jumped out at me. So initial observations, can anyone think of why I might have included this in the talk?
Well, the dog's eating the birthday cake for somebody who's outside expecting the cake to come.
Anyone else?
Well, there's big words like win and amount of money, but I can't even read the smaller text and what it's.
Yeah, it's just it's basically a scratch and when you bring out the counter. You might get a discount, or you might, win something, or at the very least, you get this crummy chocolate cake.
Well, I don't understand what the photograph has to do with that.
It's really, I mean, besides the basics, that what they're trying to imply with this happy family outside, and of course, Canadian Tire that sells a lot of outdoor products like patio furniture that they're actually sitting on now, and trying to convey that idea of, it's all right. You still got this happy birthday party because you purchased these products. You got into this kind of consumption here. So no worries about the dog eating the cake. You've got the Canadian Tire products. Keep you happy. But I flipped the card over, and on the back, it's not quite legible, but can anyone read? It says, all ingredients used to make the birthday cake in the image on the front of this card were dog-friendly, human-grade food products. So, does that give you any idea why I might have included this? And the notion of truth in this photograph. And what is the dog eating?
Chocolate cake.
Chocolate cake. Which any dog owner might know can kill a dog. And so, I guess the advertising department added that caveat on the back, assuming that after receiving a lot of hate mail on previous killings from dog owners. But you see, even on that, even though we know this is totally false image. It's an advertisement. It's geared to make you consume. But still, we see it, and we see the chocolate cake, and we think, well, there might be some truth in that. Did they feed that poor dog chocolate cake? So even in the simplest of images, where we approach them as constructed and false, we still might see some elements of truth. Now, I would ask if people are already familiar with these images, that you give others a chance to talk first before you jump in. So, what about this? This is a very old image, very famous image. Can anyone think about what kind of truths are being revealed or being hidden in this image?
Wasn't there something about this image that you see the shoe shiner is the only person that's not moving because everyone else would have been a blur because they were walking?
Yes, he's right here. Right, so this is a Degas type. This is Louis-Jacques Degas, Boulevard du Temple, Paris, circa 1838. So one of the very early photographic images, and it is the first human captured in a photograph. So, this is a very busy boulevard in Paris, yet it lies empty and vacant. So despite Degas simply trying to capture what he saw as this image, he's got his perspective on the street and whatnot, but he still cannot reveal the truth of the day, simply because the technology is not capable of capturing it due to the long exposure times. And there's also some speculation after more research that there's a little boy who may be the second human ever captured. It's just the top of his head he's peering up into the fire. It's not been confirmed. How about this image? Is anyone familiar with this image?
Yes, constructed based upon multiple photographs all pieced together.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's one of the earliest, and it is still to this day, I think, one of the most fabulous composite photographs ever created. And this is Two Ways of Light by Oscar Erlanger. And this was first exhibited in Manchester in 1857. It was later rejected from the Scottish Photographic Society due to the nature of the photographing. Does everyone see the allegory being presented there? With the two paths of vice and virtue. And the master with his two stalwart students trying to choose. And this is also often referenced as the first nudes to appear in a photograph. And this is between 32 and 40 single images taken by Erlanger and then carefully put together. And this is all shot at his estate with his wife, and they made the backgrounds, they made everything. And despite that being 1857 is quite a remarkable piece of work. So even if we go back, this is, well over decades and decades and decades before someone had even conceived of Photoshop yet. Here you have it, and you have to think about the period eye, the people that would have been viewing this who are accustomed to viewing paintings and drawings and sketches and prints, but the pictorial realism that's captured here, and to present this allegory. Another very famous image. Can anyone tell me something about this photograph?
He waited a long time to take it.
Okay. Anyone else? Does everyone know who the photographer is?
Cartier-Bresson.
Cartier-Bresson. And this is à la derrière de la Gare Saint-Lazare, behind Gare Saint-Lazare, 1932. And this is widely considered one of the greatest photographs ever taken. And also is the embodiment of what Garçon coined as the decisive moment. However, a scholar named Goldstein begs to differ and calls it very much a decided moment. And because there is no contact sheet to reveal how long he was waiting or how many other photographs he might have taken, or what transpired until this person plodded along, leapt up a ladder to try and jump this puddle. And others read into it because this is just before the rise of Hitler and the Nazis, and you see this Brailovsky in the background, that it's kind of a foreshadowing of Europe jumping into the abyss. Is anyone familiar with this image?
No, but that's Salvador Dali.
Salvador Dali? Does anyone know the photographer? It's a photographer named Halsband, but this is not actually the photograph that was exhibited or presented. This is an outtake, so this is an outtake from his contact sheet. And it shows you, gives you an idea of how the photograph was constructed. You can see the strings and the paintings, water coming in, Dali there, another assistant holding a chair. So it gives you an idea into how this was constructed, even though without Photoshop, without any manipulation in post-processing, how you can construct a very believable image. And it took him 28 takes and an unknown number of angry cats to capture this image, which kind of embodies that very quirky personality of Salvador Dali, who was later captured a few decades later walking his anteater in downtown Paris. But again, it's showcasing what they want to present to you. And this was supposedly a study in movement. Now, this is a very iconic image. Can anyone tell me the context, the background in this image? Does anyone know the title of the image? Yep. Okay, this is the Pulitzer Prize winning Soiling of Old Glory by Stanley Gorman. And so this image was captured during the busing in Boston, where they were taking inner city black youth and busing them out to white suburban schools. And it caused quite a lot of friction. And what do you see happening? What appears to be happening in this photograph?
The man with the American flag is about to stab this other guy.
Right. This man appears to be about to impale that man. What about this man behind him? He's holding him. Anything else? So, the young man, he's actually a 17-year-old man named Rakes. And this is a lawyer named Landsmark who was on his way home after work near City Hall and had passed through this angry group of protesters against the busing situation. But what's actually revealed when you look at Foreman's contact sheet is that it is not quite what transpired. So here you can see another man who's interacting with the crowd and just trying to, get out of Dodge. And you can see the crowd gathers, and there's Landsmark right here. And the crowd is starting to gather around him. And now they've started accosting him. The other guy's still trying to get out of the scene. And they seem to have captured Landsmark. The other man's fleeing the scene as the others gather around Landsmark. And they beat him, throw him to the ground, kicking him, and he's out. still attacking Landsmark. And then Foreman's motor drive jams, so the frames start to overlap, right? He said he could hear it in the camera. So then you see Landsmark there falling to the ground, the young man coming up to kick him as he's down. And again. And then his motor drive again fails. And there you see Rakes begins to enter the scene with the flag here. And then you don't quite see what's going on, but then on the last frame of the roll, you've got the Pulitzer Prize winning image. But that, what appears to be happening in this image is not, actually, he did not, Rakes didn't lunge at him. He was swinging it violently around him. The man behind him, not holding it, but helped him up and away from the crowd. And the editors were questioning whether they would publish this because of all the racial tensions at the time, the 70s. And they said the only reason it probably wouldn't have been riots was because the billionaire tycoon, I'm escaping me again, the guy that Leonardo DiCaprio played.
Howard Hughes?
Hmm?
Howard Hughes?
Yes, thank you. Howard Hughes had died the same day, so it took the front page. So did this, but it kind of, Foreman was kind of pissed off that he had died on that day, that his photograph had been released. But again, they questioned whether they would publish the other image around to give it context. But to this day, the image is still very poignant and powerful. And I recently had the pleasure to attend a talk by Jen El-Shabazz, who you may know is a renowned documentary street photographer who documented the crack epidemic and its effects in Harlem in the 80s. And this is one of the images he had included in his talk as well, and I was very pleased to see it pop up. And afterwards I asked him if he knew the entire story about Rakes not actually stabbing him, but the man, you know, not holding him back, but held him up. And he said, and I asked him if that changed the impact of this image or how he interpreted it. And his answer was no, it did not. He said this is not a quote, but he said it captured the context, the sentiment, the atmosphere at that time. So despite various elements in this being fabrications or lies as they appear to us, it captured that day, that time, perfectly. And he said he didn't have to hold a flag. He could be waving his middle finger. There was an anger in the eyes. You know, that's what comes through in that photograph. This is another interesting photograph. It's does everyone know this guy? Yeah. Here's the arch nemesis from down Cuba, Fidel Castro, and this man right here. He's kind of a scholar poet who also participated in the revolution. It's Carlos Franqui. But they had a falling out after Castro took power. So Castro subsequently had all Franqui's images erased from all the party official photos. Upon hearing this, Carlos Franqui wrote, "I discover my photographic death. Do I exist? I am a little black, and a little white, and a little shit on Fidel's best." So again, this kind of brings the notion of photography as proof. So that, you know, you can't prove that you've been there or you've seen someone until you have that photographic evidence. Or you can't prove who you are, your identity, without your government-issued ID, your passport, things like this. And if you want to go into a deeper sense of like Foucauldian truth and existence, do you exist if there are no photographs of you? And this is a little lighter. So, this is again pre-Photoshop. So, does anyone care to guess what what was manipulated here. Pre-Photoshop, but it is manipulated in post-production. Shadow. Anyone else?
Well, would that actually be the trajectory of a cork coming out of the bottle?
Exactly.
Seems
I
odd.
think you'd have to be quite the physicist to arrange that sort of. So this is all, this is a painted photograph. So the shadow, all of this is all painted on, but quite realistically done. And again, this is Jean-Paul Goude, Carolina, painted photo from 1976. So again, it's even about 10, roughly 10 years before those kind of digital technologies and photos they even started. Still, he's more of a fashion commercial photographer, and one would not, one would expect that kind of, playful manipulation in these types of photographs, but you wouldn't expect it on the cover of National Geographic. Does anyone know this very famous photograph and what National Geographic did to it? So, National Geographic squeezed the pyramids together. They can't get that perspective. So they squeezed the pyramids together, and on top of that, these gentlemen with their camels, they had them posed. So they saw them out the distance, they got one of their helpers to go over, round them up, and ask them to walk through in front of the pyramids to capture this image. So, I mean, it's kind of shocking, I guess, to many people that National Geographic, which is often associated with being a very trusted, objective purveyor of our photographic world, would do this kind of blatant manipulation. And there's a very good book by Lutz and Collins called Reading National Geographic, in which they talk about the ways in which the Western eye looks at the rest of the world, and the way that National Geographic often, instead of uncovering truths about other cultures around the world, reinforces preconceived notions that we already have about those cultures. So, next I'm going to go into media and advertising. how many of you are already familiar with this video? Okay, a few of you. And what are your impressions now after just viewing it? How does that make you feel?
Deceived. Deceived.
Mm-hmm.
Frustrated.
Frustrated?
It's actually depressing.
Depressing? And how do you feel about dub?
I feel worse about them.
Worse
Because I think they will lie to us anyway, and
Mhm.
this is part of their lie,
Mm-hmm.
that, oh, we don't do this with our models. I don't believe it.
And this is another one I presented to my art education preschool teachers, the majority of which are women. And again, this was a few years ago before the subsequent, because I mean they've continued with this campaign for real beauty in a number of different videos, and it's been spoofed since then. But they attributed some positive feelings about that. I think the general public at first sight also received some good positive feelings about the videos and the brand, and it is a total construction. And my old art history professor, undergraduate advisor, came and saw this talk a few weeks ago on Halifax, and he actually mentioned, gave me another detail in this video that the Photoshop portion of this is all faked. Because they couldn't actually film that, so it's a composite video in itself.
Oh.
So they're faking the fakes. And does anyone know who owns Dub? Unilever.
What is it?
Unilever. And does anyone know what other brands Unilever owns? Axe deodorant. Those very misogynistic, total stereotype, ridiculous commercials, where women flock to the set and so on. So again, I point out to my students to question the motives of the makers. And here, in this case, it's to sell more of that moisturizing bars of soap. And here, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Highlights magazine. When you're kids, spot the differences. So, between these three images, circle the differences. Her eyes. Mm-hmm. Definitely different colors.
Her nose.
The nose.
Her chin, the little one.
Yeah.
Yes.
The
Chin.
neck.
She has 3 different chins. Right? Very different sculpted chins on Reese Witherspoon across 3 different magazines.
Her flesh tone.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Her neck and her collarbone.
It's all almost like 3 different women, right? Who might be sisters. And although I haven't included here, there's another image, and it's of Kate Winslet on the cover of FHM magazine, right? And I think fishnet stockings and kind of all dolled up. But when the cover had been released, she realized that they had reduced her legs by 1/3, and she was extremely upset, and she called them out in public because she had actually, after a movie, had gone on a regimen and was actually very, very pleased with how she looked. So she was actually very offended. She called out FHM in public. And apparently that somewhat led to 17 magazine making a pledge not to retouch any photographs, although I don't know how stringently they've adhered to that promise. But again, you find this, when presented with them side by side, you can see this, but do all the young women around the States or in any countries where these are circulating, even in Asia as well, under other languages, do they immediately know how much has gone into the cover art, how much manipulation on each individual? So again, everyone remembers the white Bronco heading down very slowly down the LA Freeway. So what can you tell me? I mean, it's quite obvious, but who would like to tell me about these 2 images? They came out the same week. I think probably on the same day. Newsweek and Time magazine. Search it.
Skin color.
Mm-hmm. So what has Time done here?
Makes it more
makes him more menacing. Right? They darkened all the shadows. Right? Appears to be much scruffier. You know, his eyes are kind of lifeless here in comparison. And so the editor of Time at the Time, a man named Gaines, of course this kind of, I guess you couldn't quite say erupted because it was AOL at the time, so, you know, gently grew online the outrage towards this image. And Gaines was forced to respond, but he actually countered people saying that the image was blatantly racist by saying, you implying that the darker image is racist. So countered with counter-racism. However, for the first time in Time's history, they changed their cover. So this Time cover was only available to male subscriptions. So the ones that went on the stand had a totally different image. But he had said that it was just artistic interpretation he had given to his design guy, and he said interpret it, and that's what he did. But had not there been a Newsweek, we might not have realized this.
Do you have side-by-side of the two times, James?
Nope, I hadn't included that one. But it's not an actual photograph, it's more of a almost like a painting, and it's on a side profile.
Seeing those for the first time, you also wouldn't know which was the real image and which was the alternate image. Could have been the other way.
But if you look to the bottom, you can see that both came from the Los Angeles Police Department.
The use of typography is really interesting because with the words in front, it looks more like a set of bars than with the words in the back of the Newsweek.
So you've got these letters?
Yeah, the choice to put time in front.
You know, so it is very much like a pre-judgment before the trial's even begun. But there's a campaign in England, and they use the same techniques to point out history. You should be. He's a dentist, and this was a mobile billboard campaign that went throughout Wales and the south of England, and they displayed various racial stereotypes with hopes of pointing them out of, you know, how the general public can be racist. And this is the Commission for Racial Equality, and you can find more information on their website, equalityhumanrights.com. So again, they're countering. They're taking that and they're trying to spin it and put it in a positive light. So this is a image by Adnan Haj up in smoke. This man was suspended from Reuters. So can you guess why he was suspended from Reuters as a freelance photographer?
Well, the one on the left is fake, those clouds are horrible.
Yes.
Definitely not on Photoshop.
Yes. It's a telltale amateurish sign. You can see the swirls. It is the clone stamp. If anyone's familiar with Photoshop. If you don't know how to use the clone stamp, that is what your images look like. But one wonders what Haj was thinking at the time, because looking at the images, the original side by side, it doesn't even enhance the image. And how did this pass editorial review at Reuters, one of the foremost news image procurement agencies in the world? How did this get by? And this is the, oh sorry, this is at the top, just in case you can't read it, the bombing of Lebanon. And again, this one, is anyone familiar with this image? And can you tell me what was the manipulation done here? So which is the, identify the manipulated images, please?
It's the top
It's
one.
the top one. So what has he done?
We've made this soldier look like he's stopping a man with a child as opposed to, like the gesture is more aggressive.
Right. he's really ramped up the drama of the situation by taking to seemingly kind of inert situations, quite fairly, I wouldn't say calm, but, you know, nothing to the degree that is almost like pointing at the man. But again, this got past the editorial board and was published. It was only found out because of photo bloggers pointed it out, and they saw that some of the people in the audience appeared more than once.
Oh.
So this is an LA Times photographer, Brian Walsky. But again, this is a very blatant, constructed image. He had to sit down. That's quite a bit of work, a few hours work in Photoshop. So he's very conscious and cognizant of what he was doing here. Again, the LA Times blamed the thousands of images that poured in at that time during the Iraq War on that mistake of letting it through to be published.
What was that poll? You removed that poll, whatever it was, but anyway.
So the top one is the one they used?
Yes, that's the one that appeared in the LA Times.
How was it discovered?
Photo bloggers, because they identified that you can see some of the people are appear twilight. You can't quite see it, and this is not a great quality photograph, but they discovered it through the audience, the people sitting in the crowd. Okay. Oh, this one is it. So, again, taking this back into an educational context, or what might be done to provide a counter to the billions and billions of images that are put up, but even just the millions that are put up by advertising agencies. And this is a Spanish artist named Daniel Soares, and he came up with a brilliant little simple campaign against H&M. And basically, if you're familiar with Photoshop, he's printed off a Photoshop palette and placed them nicely on the side of the image, transforming H&M's advertisements into a critique on how they produce these images, and almost making it into an ad for Photoshop. So kind of like this is an example of ad busting, kind of counterculture response to advertising, which although I technically couldn't really encourage students to do because of various laws, it is, I think, a very good critique and a good example of what can be done in a very constructive and non-destructive way.
Well, that goes to the adage too, sex sells. And even if you talk about that with your students and go to a magazine and find an ad that doesn't have sexual implications is incredibly hard to do.
So if you go to his website, danielsoares.me/HM busting, you can see more on this campaign. But again, even if you do realize as you're walking by these images in public, regardless of viewing them as false, they still have an impact on you. Whether it's consciously or subconsciously, it cannot help but have an impact seeing thousands and thousands of these images over the course of a year. And to what degree that this influences young minds as they grow up and the self and identity, it's really not been terribly deeply studied, although we can all guess the impact is quite negative.
I had a situation, I teach yearbook at an all-girls high school, and they took their senior photos and midway through the year started editing them in Photoshop. And at a certain point, you know, they're kind of working independently and I'm kind of overseeing. And at a certain point I look over and the pictures had become unrecognizable. Like they'd over-edited it so much that, you know, starting to move like I eyes around and like skin color and teeth. They looked like aliens, and it was kind of like one of those like, okay, we're gonna have to start from scratch, scrap everything that you've done, because like, and it's a compulsion almost to like, you know, and they pose for everything, you know. You had come to the school to take candid photos. She came to take the candid photos, and it's like getting a candid photo is almost impossible because they all do the like, you know, the side pose and the like, and it's become so hard to tell the story in a truthful way, the story of the year in my case, because we do a little bit of editing and manipulation just in terms of like design and fitting it on a page and stuff, but then to like stop the younger mind from taking it to the extreme that they are so accustomed to, and like pulling them back from that edge, it's close to impossible. Like it just becomes like a daily struggle. Like stop, walk away, step away from the Photoshop.
So what was the result of that?
Well,
The discovery?
I mean, we scrapped all the work that they did and had to start over with the original images. And now it's kind of like, you know, I have to constantly be looking for these over-edited images, and I'm only one editor, and there, you know, there's ones that get past me, and not as bad as some of the boys' schools in the area that did like three-legged football players and other such things. But I mean, it's an interesting thing that we're at the cusp of with the younger generations, and I feel like I don't have the answer, like how you stop them. I mean, what have you seen with your students in terms of like over-editing?
Well, in terms of my photography classes, I actually encourage them to do that. And some of the young women have actually explored their identity and gender through these images quite successfully. So, and both in the darkroom and in Photoshop. But that's kind of one of the projects I asked is to explore the notion of truth and manipulation and reality or the self.
Yeah.
So I encourage them to be familiar with the ways in which they can manipulate both traditional analog and digital photography, so they can more easily recognize it and again teach those same skills to their students. These are some of my own artworks that you'll see on the card. Again, as you pass through on the card, you've noticed, and my website is untitledartist.com. And I never title any of my works because I really enjoy what viewers bring to the work. And people, you know, most people like recognizable photography. So when they're presented with these, they first think of paintings, and then they want to create these narratives, and I love hearing these narratives. But again, even though my intentions are to keep it as a blank slate, so to speak, just the positioning of the image alone evokes different responses. So how I'm putting it up in a gallery is going to affect your interpretation, whether I like it or not. And again, these are just some of the titles I've attached. I never titled my work, but some of the reactions are some of my friends. So you've got jellyfish, a comet, a sperm, a hot caldera coming out of the side of a volcano. So even when an artist such as myself, I'm trying to approach this and trying to leave it open, but still I'm making all these decisions, cropping and placement of the image, and especially artists that title their work, they are leading you on to an interpretation of that image. So these are some of the lighter sides of truth, and also kind of examples that students could do to play with this notion of reality. So this one I'm not quite sure that I have the attribution right, but this is where I found it on arrested motion. So here you play, excuse me, the photographers played very nicely with the unit of scale and reality on these little tourists exploring, you know, a discarded Marlborough monument. So I mean, there's lots of interesting and fun ways that people and students can approach manipulation. design into reality. Here's another, bringing us back to that earlier image, Lego Dolly Atomicus. And there's a whole series. I have this one attributed to Mike Stimson, but I'm not entirely sure he is the original artist, but there have been many Lego creations, Lego Mona Lisa, and there's also a Lego Cartier-Bresson that I showed you earlier. So lots of ways. It's not all doom and gloom. We can kind of take on this notion and really have some fun, and it can be very creative, and it's very multifaceted. There's no one way to approach it. So here, the work of two artists. One is Sasha Goldberger, a French artist, and the other is Rankin, a British commercial fashion photographer. So he created this series called Super Mimika, where he plays with the identity of his grandmother, who, upon hearing some of her stories from the past, she's a survivor of the Nazi occupation, and kind of sees her as embodying the kind of superhuman or superhero qualities. So again, a very fun, creative way of approaching and manipulating photographs. I'll just play a little clip of him. I don't think I have time to play it all because it's quite long, but I'll just let him talk about his work briefly.
Olga presents French photographer Sasha Goldberg.
I started to make some pictures about my grandmother, so I asked her to make strange things like backside on a motorbike, going backside on a motorbike, or eating onions in a sandwich. And so on and on, we made so many pictures of her for the website. And the pictures, I put the pictures on the internet, and after a while they became very famous. People wanted some more and more, and it was a kind of game, you know, just like my grandmother and I, we were trying to make every time the best pictures and better again. So I was very close to my mother and to my grandmother, and when I was small, my mother, she raised me, and when at the age of 15 or 16, our relation became more difficult, which is normal, because when you grow up, you have to fight with your parents to be an adult. So I started to be very close to my grandma, and she's fantastic. We had a lot of good time together, and you know, she learned me how to drive, and she took me to lots of countries and cities, and so we were very close. I'm very close to my mother, and I'm also very close to my grandmother.
And lastly, I'll just show you a few images from, I guess, Rankin, who does some very nice Photoshop work with composites, where he explores these weird identity crisis type images with him combined with a pig. This is a composite of him and his wife. This is a composite of him and a famous female British boxer. And then this is just him with two heads. So again, as far as the education portion of truth and photography and manipulation and reality, it's a very good vehicle for exploring these things like gender and self and identity. But I guess the takeaway I want, especially for my students or anyone that's interested, is not to automatically distrust all images or to dismiss all images because of the rampant use of manipulation, but to always keep a critical eye, to analyze and to peel back the layers to see, because even a totally false image is telling us, it's revealing these elements of truth from the photographer, from society, from whatever context. But the key is to separating those lies and truths and making up your own mind. Thank you very much. Okay, so we've got 5 minutes for any further comments or questions.
In your teaching, are you teaching photography? Is that?
I did do 2 classes of light-based media as a graduate student, but I'm not currently teaching.
And in your work with students, and you mentioned this earlier, this is one of your main objectives. Is that right, to have them look critically?
Yes, of course. That's one of the key elements, I think, across the board throughout art, not just photography, but any artwork.
Have any of your students gone in the, post manipulated advertisements and other things to the best of your knowledge?
No, because I only had 2 iterations of this class. And the first one I didn't introduce the project of manipulation. It was the second class, so I only got, but one young woman had done a brilliant job in the darkroom, and I should probably include that in my later presentations, where she had did a composite print, and she had dressed up herself as a man, and then had herself as she is a female, and then posed them on either side of this doorway with this brilliant exploration of gender, which I really enjoyed. But no one specifically took on advertisements in that class. Mostly a lot of composites in the digital portions, and a lot of just traditional dark room techniques that Regellander would have used.
It's just interesting that the photographs you show are the people got caught from manipulating. For all people who did it badly.
Yeah.
Which means people who know what they're doing.
Exactly.
I mean, I know there's ways to still check it, but it's.
Like the editors say, as their excuse, they get thousands of those images. That's true.
Sure.
I mean, the people that might be more skilled and kind of really doing really subtle manipulations that still can change the context or the interpretation of images are probably out there, and we're probably seeing them and being manipulated by them.
When does it turn from a photograph to an illustration too? I mean, you're supposed to identify, if you manipulate a photograph at all, you're supposed to identify it as then becoming an illustration, but I know a lot of kids and people don't do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. So at what point does it stop being photographed? And
it's a huge problem in
it's
competition.
For the gray area.
Well, it's interesting that in Photoshop you can kind of catch it, but if the the context sheets from the civil rights movement saying like it's the spirit of the picture, even if that person wasn't doing something bad, they look like they're doing something bad. Is that what's different than the manipulation of an image to capture the spirit of a war as opposed to what it really looked like.
Right.
It seems like those are sort of
And
similar.
then there are some arguments to that extent about the choices, editorial choices, like cropping. There's I mean, there are so many images of I could almost do this talk 100 times over, and each time have a brand new set of images. There's ones like Abraham Lincoln's portrait was minted, his head on another body of a Southern slave. I think it was, I'm not sure, because I don't know my presidents. Maybe Jackson or someone that he'd switched the head, or from, oh no, it was Calhoun. The guy, the slave owner, from the Confederate Calhoun, and his head was placed on Calhoun's body, and he was the abolitionist. And there's the one from the Vietnam War that everyone's familiar with the little girl running from napalm, but that one was cropped. And on the side of that one, there was another photographer, and it was kind of, it kind of dulled the intensity of the image, having the other photographer just checking his loading film and his camera on the side, so they took him out.
I was just going to suggest an idea to you that may be of interest. You could add a layer of your presentation on the fact that arguably, even the most unmanipulated photograph, even the camera raw, so to speak, information coming through is manipulated. And if you look at Panofsky in particular and the history of perspective, I think it's very interesting to think that even those images that are totally unmanipulated are processed through the rules of linear perspective. And that's just one way of seeing, Panofsky argues. And it's a particularly modern and a particularly Western way of seeing. And that all of us, Panofsky argues, have been brainwashed. He uses the word habituation, through looking at linear perspective pictures over centuries. And now looking at photographs every day, repeatedly, we keep reinforcing this particular way of seeing. And it's one way of seeing. It's not the natural way of seeing. It is one particular constructed way of seeing. That's always fascinating me.
Yeah, again, it goes back to Cartier-Bresson. There's other images, like there's a cyclist passing through this narrow street. Again, he found this place, and he knew this was a good angle, and he's got all those elements, the leading lines, and a very astute photographer, and just waiting for that cyclist. He's like, dang, I've got it. And again, Barry Goldstein's article, All Photographs Live, it's very interesting read if you want to continue along these lines. Is that he said, the public's outrage is only equal to the reasoning of the photographer's manipulation, and if you can resolve that reasoning, then there is less outrage.
Well, we're at time.
Okay, thank you very much.